Chapter 1: What the Coyotes Left. The silence was the first sign. Mateo Cruz stood on his back porch, a chipped ceramic mug of coffee warming his palms. The sun was a searing orange line on the eastern horizon, promising another day of punishing West Texas heat. Usually, this time of morning was a chorus. The low, contented bleating of his flock, the frantic chirping of sparrows in the eaves of the barn, the distant, rhythmic squeak of the pumpjack on the adjacent property. Today there was only the arid wind, a low whisper across the parched earth, carrying the scent of dust and creosote. He took a slow sip of the coffee. It was bitter. He set the mug down on the weathered railing, his eyes scanning the property. The fences looked intact. The barn door was shut, but the sheep pasture, a wide expanse of brown grass and stubborn scrub, was unnervingly still. He wiped his hands on his jeans and descended the porch steps, the worn heels of his boots crunching on the gravel path. He unlatched the gate to the pasture and stepped through, his gaze sweeping the area. He saw the first one near the water trough, a ewe lying on her side. Her stillness was absolute wrong. Mateo's pace quickened. He approached the animal, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. This was not a natural death. There was no blood. That was the second sign, more disturbing than the first. The ewe's wool was matted around a series of deep, parallel gashes along her ribs, but the ground beneath was clean, unstained. He crouched, his fingers tracing the edge of one wound. It was a clean surgical incision, impossibly deep. He pushed gently at the carcass. It was light, hollow. He'd seen coyote kills. He'd seen what cougars could do. This was neither. A coyote tears, rips, worries at a carcass. A cougar drags its kill to a secluded spot. This animal was simply left where it fell, an empty vessel. He stood and walked further into the field. Over a small rise he found the rest of them, dozens, strewn across the landscape like discarded toys. Each one was the same, the clean gashes, the bizarre lack of blood, the hollowed-out weight. He walked among them, a grim inventory of his livelihood, destroyed in a single night. A wave of cold fury washed over the grief. He reached for the phone on his belt and punched in the number for the county sheriff's office. "Clara, it's Mateo Cruz," he said, his voice flat. "Get Cole out here. Something happened to my flock." Sheriff Cole Bannerman's truck kicked up a plume of beige dust as it rumbled down the long dirt drive to the Cruz ranch. He saw Mateo standing by the pasture gate, a rigid silhouette against the rising sun. Cole had been sheriff of Cinder Creek County for 27 years. He was a broad-shouldered man whose face was a road map of long days under the Texas sun. He moved with a deliberation that some mistook for slowness, but was in fact the economy of motion one learns from a lifetime of conserving energy in an unforgiving climate. He killed the engine and stepped out of the truck, the door groaning in protest. "Mateo," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Cole," Mateo nodded once, his expression hard. "In here." Bannerman followed him into the pasture. He stopped at the first ewe, taking in the scene with a practiced eye. He crouched, mirroring Mateo's earlier inspection. He pulled a pair of latex gloves from his pocket and carefully probed one of the wounds. "Sharp," he murmured. "Whatever did this has claws like razors or a knife." "No man did this," Mateo said. "Look at them, all of them." Cole stood and surveyed the grim tableau. The sheer number was staggering. A predator with this level of success was unheard of. A pack of coyotes might get a few, but they were messy, inefficient. This was slaughter, methodical. He walked from one carcass to the next, his boots leaving dark prints in the dew-dampened dust. The pattern was identical on every animal. 3 clean slashes, exsanguinated. "You see any tracks?" Cole asked, his eyes scanning the ground. "Only my own," Mateo replied. "And the sheep, it's like it came from the sky." Bannerman pulled out his own phone. He took dozens of pictures, capturing the bodies, the wounds, the unsettling cleanliness of the scene from every conceivable angle. He was a lawman, and this was a crime scene, even if the victims were livestock. He had a procedure, but procedure felt woefully inadequate. "I need to make a call," Bannerman said, looking away from the carnage toward the distant mountains. "There's a biologist over at the university research station, Yana Orellana. She studied predators in this region for years. She might see something I don't." Mateo just stared at his ruined flock, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Whatever this is, Cole, it ain't natural." Bannerman didn't reply. He was looking at the fence line. A section of wire fencing, 5 feet high, was bent sharply downwards as if something incredibly heavy had simply pressed it to the ground to step over it. He walked to the spot. There were no footprints on either side. He ran a gloved hand over the bent metal. Nothing. It made no sense. He made the call. An hour later, Dr. Yana Orellana arrived. She drove a dusty Subaru with a university logo peeling off the driver's side door. She was a woman in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore hiking boots and cargo pants with a dozen pockets. She was all business. "Sheriff," she said, her voice crisp as she shook his hand. She gave Mateo a sympathetic nod. "Mr. Cruz, I'm sorry for your loss." She wasted no time. Pulling a comprehensive sampling kit from her car, she went to work. Bannerman watched as she measured the depth and spacing of the incisions with a digital caliper. She took tissue samples from the wound edges, swabbed the interior of the carcasses, and collected soil from underneath several of the animals. Her movements were precise, efficient, a stark contrast to the chaotic violence of the scene. "The exsanguination is remarkable," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration as she peered at a tissue sample through a portable field microscope. "There's almost no cellular damage around the major arteries. A normal predator's bite or claw tears tissue. The blood loss is messy, a result of trauma. This is different. It's as if the vascular system was tapped, drained with a pump." "A pump," Bannerman repeated, the word sounding absurd in the open air. "A biological one, perhaps," Orellana clarified, not looking up. "A proboscis or a specialized tongue, something that could create a perfect vacuum. I've never seen anything like it. The incisions, they're not from teeth or claws as we understand them. The tissue isn't torn, it's sliced. The cellular walls are sheared cleanly. Whatever made these cuts is sharper than any surgical scalpel." She straightened up, pushing her sunglasses onto her forehead. "Coyotes don't do this. Cougars don't do this. People, for the most part, can't do this. I'll need to run these samples through a mass spectrometer. But my initial assessment, Sheriff, is that this predation is not from any known North American carnivore. The sun was high and hot now, beating down on the three of them. The smell of death, subtle at first, was beginning to rise from the field. "So what are we dealing with?" Cole asked, the question hanging heavy in the shimmering heat. Orellana packed a final sample vial into her kit. She looked from the dead sheep to the vast, empty expanse of the desert that stretched to the mountains. "I have no idea," she said, "but it's a fantastically efficient hunter." That evening, Bannerman sat in his office, the blinds drawn against the setting sun. The air conditioner hummed a weary tune. The photos from the Cruz Ranch were displayed on his computer monitor, a grid of silent, bloodless horror. He'd filed a report. He'd opened a case file. The words on the screen seemed inadequate, bureaucratic nonsense in the face of what he had seen. He leaned forward, rubbing his tired eyes. The town of Cinder Creek was quiet. It was always quiet. It was a place where life moved at the speed of a drowsy lizard. Most days his biggest problem was a drunk at the local bar or a couple of kids speeding on the highway. This was different. This felt ancient and predatory. The phone on his desk buzzed, a harsh, intrusive sound. He picked it up. "Sheriff Bannerman." It was Clara, his dispatcher. Her voice was strained. "Cole, you need to hear this. I just got a call from the Henderson place, up north near the old quarry." Cole's posture straightened. He held his breath. "It's their cattle," Clara said, her voice dropping. "They say something got to their cattle." Chapter 2. A hum on the wire. A week passed. A thick blanket of fear, woven from rumor and speculation, settled over Cinder Creek. The story of Mateo's flock had spread, mutating with each telling. It was a pack of mutant coyotes. It was a satanic cult. It was the devil himself, come to claim his due from the dusty town. Doors were locked at sunset. The chatter at the Dusty Spoon Diner, normally a boisterous affair, was reduced to hushed conversations and worried glances. Alma Suarez found herself wiping down empty counters, the silence of her diner more unnerving than any noise. Sheriff Bannerman held a town hall meeting. It did little to quell the anxiety. He presented the facts as he had them. An unknown predator was responsible for 2 incidents of livestock predation. He advised vigilance. He promised increased patrols. The crowd was not satisfied. They wanted answers he didn't have. He saw Mateo Cruz in the back, his arms crossed, his face a grim mask. He didn't say a word. Kobe Rivas, a lanky 17-year-old with an unearned confidence, saw the situation not as a threat, but as an opportunity. He was a self-proclaimed filmmaker, his prized possession a professional-grade drone his father had bought him for his birthday. While his friends were panicking, Kobe was planning. This was his chance to capture something amazing, something that would get him millions of views and a ticket out of Cinder Creek. "You are not to go out after dark, you hear me?" his mother said, her voice sharp with worry as he calibrated the drone's rotors in the garage. "I'm not going out," Kobe replied, not looking at her. "It is. That's the point." "This isn't a movie, Kobe. People are scared. The Hendersons lost $6,000 in a single night. And nobody has a picture of it," he shot back, finally meeting her gaze. Imagine what that would be worth. He ignored her frustrated sigh and went back to his work. The fear in the town was an abstract concept to him. The creature was a challenge, a mythical beast waiting for him to reveal it to the world. The call came on a moonless Thursday night. The voice on the line to the sheriff's office was ragged, panicked. "It's Jedediah Stone. It's outside my cabin. It's trying to get in." Cole Bannerman recognized the name instantly. Jedediah was the town eccentric, a grizzled prospector who lived in a fortified cabin 5 miles out in the rocky scrubland. He was paranoid on his best days. Jedediah calmed down. "What do you see?" Cole asked, signaling to his young deputy, Finn Riley, to get ready to roll. "Nothing, I can't see nothing, but I can hear it, scratching, tearing at the door. Oh God, it's on the roof." The line filled with a deafening shriek of tearing metal, followed by a grunt of surprise from Jedediah, and then silence. The line went dead. Jedediah, Cole slammed the phone down. "Let's go now." Deputy Finn Riley, barely a year out of the academy, gripped the shotgun in his hands, his knuckles white. The patrol truck sped through the night, its headlights cutting a frantic path through the oppressive darkness of the desert. "Probably a bear got at his trash," Finn said, his voice a little too high. "Jedediah doesn't have trash," Cole said flatly, "and his front door is reinforced steel. A bear couldn't scratch it." They found the cabin in a state of violent disarray. The steel door, which Cole had once seen shrug off a blow from a sledgehammer during one of Jedediah's paranoid demonstrations, was peeled open like the lid of a tin can. 3 deep furrows were gouged into the metal, the edges curled back to reveal the cabin's dark interior. "Sheriff's office," Cole yelled, his own shotgun now in his hands. He and Finn advanced slowly, their flashlights cutting sharp, nervous beams into the darkness. The inside was wrecked. Furniture was overturned. Cans of food were scattered across the floor. In the far corner, huddled underneath a heavy oak table, was Jedediah Stone. He was shaking uncontrollably, his eyes wide with a terror that went far beyond his usual paranoia. "It's gone," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It was on the roof. It tore through the roof." Cole pointed his flashlight up. A jagged hole had been ripped in the corrugated tin roofing, the edges bent upwards. Whatever had done this had come in from above. "Did you see it, Jedediah?" Cole asked, his voice gentle. The old prospector shook his head, then nodded, his movements jerky and confused. "Just a shape, tall, fast. It had this tail like a whip. I fired my pistol at it. It didn't even flinch. It just looked at me. And then it left." Unseen by the lawman on the ground, a small, black shape hummed a mile away. Kobe Rivas sat in his desk chair, his face illuminated by the glow of his monitor, which displayed the live feed from his drone. He had heard the call on his police scanner and launched the drone immediately, his heart pounding with excitement. Flying it by GPS towards Jedediah's remote cabin was difficult, but his skill was undeniable. He arrived just as the creature was retreating. The thermal camera on his drone pierced the darkness, revealing a heat signature moving with incredible speed away from the cabin. It was tall, upright, and moving on 2 legs. It flowed over the rocky terrain, its movements fluid and impossibly agile. As it scrambled up a rock face, Kobe caught a clear image of its silhouette against the colder stone. It was lean, powerfully built, with a long, reptilian tail trailing behind it. It paused for a moment at the top of a ridge, turning its head as if it could sense the drone's presence, before disappearing over the other side. "Oh my God," Kobe breathed, his fingers flying across the controls to save the recording. He had it. He had the proof. Back in town, Bannerman dropped a shaken Jedediah off at the clinic for observation. He told Finn to start a perimeter search at sunrise, a futile gesture he recognized but had to perform. As he drove back to his office, the town felt different. The fear was no longer a vague anxiety. It was a sharp, focused point. This thing wasn't just killing animals anymore. It was testing doors. The next morning, his office door opened and Kobe Rivas strode in, a laptop clutched in his hands. "Sheriff, you need to see this," Kobe said, his voice brimming with a mixture of fear and pride. Cole watched, his expression unreadable as the boy played the footage. The shaky, thermal image of the creature moving through the night, the impossible speed, the whip-like tail. It was blurry, it was grainy, but it was undeniably real. "You were flying that thing over an active scene." Cole's voice was low, dangerous. "I got it on camera," Kobe insisted, missing the sheriff's point entirely. "Nobody else has this. This changes everything." Cole stared at the frozen image on the screen, at the lean, predatory shape. Kobe was right. It did change everything. He placed a call to Dr. Orellana. "You need to get down here," he said, no preamble. "We have a picture." That night, Mateo Cruz did not go inside when the sun went down. The unofficial curfew meant nothing to him. Grief had burned away his fear, leaving something colder and harder in its place. He sat on his porch, a heavy-caliber hunting rifle resting across his lap, its wooden stock smooth and familiar in his hands. He had spent the day reinforcing the new fence around his remaining livestock, a handful of goats and a milk cow. He would not lose another animal. The desert night was unnaturally silent again. He strained his ears, listening past the gentle hum of the cicadas. He was listening for something else, something he'd only heard in his nightmares since he'd found his flock. Then he heard it. It came from the direction of the newly repaired sheep pen, a low, guttural clicking, an insectal, chittering sound that scraped at the nerves. It was a sound that had no place in the natural world. Mateo rose slowly, silently from his chair. He brought the rifle to his shoulder, the cool metal of the stock pressing against his cheek. He sighted down the barrel into the impenetrable darkness beyond the reach of his porch light. He could see nothing, but he could hear it, closer now. A soft scraping sound, like claws on dry earth. He held his breath, his finger resting on the trigger. He was the bait, and something was coming to take it. Chapter 3: The Second Signature. The air at the power substation was thick with the electric hum of transformers. Gabe Nolan, a man whose body had long ago synchronized with the rhythms of the night shift, sat in his small, climate-controlled office, his boots up on the desk. He was midway through a crossword puzzle when the lights flickered. Not once, but 3 times in quick succession. The humming from the yard outside his window changed pitch, rising to an angry, metallic whine before settling back into its normal drone. Gabe lowered his boots to the floor. Power fluctuations weren't uncommon, but this was different. He glanced at the bank of monitors displaying the station's output. A massive, instantaneous power draw localized to the primary transformer array. A surge so brief and intense it shouldn't have been possible. He squinted at the screen. It looked like a lightning strike, but the sky outside his window was clear, studded with a million cold, distant stars. He stood and walked to the window, peering out at the massive structures in the yard. Everything appeared normal. The chain-link fence surrounding the station was intact. The transformers stood like silent, steel behemoths under the harsh glare of the security lights. He shook his head. A system ghost. A sensor misreading. He went back to his crossword. He didn't see the patch of air near the main fence shimmer like heat haze on a winter's day before resolving into nothing. 2 nights later, the creature, the one Kobe Rivas had dubbed the Cinder Creek Scourge on the video he'd foolishly uploaded to the internet, attacked again. This time, its target was a horse stable on the western edge of town. The attack was swift, brutal, and loud. The terrified whinnying of horses and the splintering of wood echoed through the quiet streets. Sheriff Bannerman and Deputy Riley were on the scene in minutes, but as they screeched to a halt, their headlights cutting through the swirling dust, they saw that they were not the first to arrive. The scene was bizarrely still. A section of the stable wall had been torn away, but the sounds of struggle had ceased. "What the hell?" Finn breathed, his hand hovering over the grip of his pistol. They got out of the car, weapons drawn. A large shape was lying in the dirt just outside the ruined stable. It was the Scourge, or what was left of it. The creature was dead. Its lean, gray body was sprawled in the dust, its whip-like tail lying limp. But it wasn't the dead monster that froze Bannerman in his tracks. It was the way it had been killed. There were no gunshots. There were no claw marks other than its own. Instead, 3 perfectly circular, cauterized holes were punched clean through the creature's torso. The edges of the wounds glowed with a faint, residual heat, sizzling softly in the cool night air. The air smelled of ozone and scorched meat. Inside the stable, the horses were panicked but impossibly unharmed. They kicked and stamped in their stalls, their eyes wide with terror. "Look," Finn said, his flashlight beam aimed at the ground near the Scourge's body. There, pressed into the hard-packed earth, was a single print. It was not animal. It was not human. It was triangular, composed of 3 distinct, sharp-edged sections that met in the center. It was a footprint, but it belonged to something utterly alien. Bannerman holstered his shotgun. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Yana Orellana's contact number. He didn't need an expert to tell him what he was seeing. He needed an expert to tell him what it meant. "Seal this area," he said to Finn, his voice grim. "Nobody in or out. Call Des Gable. Tell her to bring her flatbed truck. We're moving this thing." Dr. Orellana arrived before the flatbed, her Subaru skidding to a halt beside the patrol car. She took one look at the dead Scourge, at the glowing, cauterized wounds, and her scientific composure visibly cracked for the first time. "This is impossible," she whispered, crouching beside the corpse but not touching it. She pulled a Geiger counter from her bag. It immediately began to click, the sound growing frantic as she brought it closer to the wounds. High-level energy discharge, not radiation in the traditional sense. This is focused, like a directed energy weapon. She stood and followed Bannerman's gaze to the strange, triangular print on the ground. She photographed it, measured it, her mind racing. Two distinct predators, she said, more to herself than to Cole. One biological, a hyper-efficient carnivore, the other, technological. This print, these wounds. Sheriff, the scourge wasn't the only hunter here tonight. It was being hunted itself. The implication hung between them, more terrifying than the dead monster at their feet. The town had been living in fear of a creature that tore people and animals apart. Now they had evidence of something else, something that could kill that creature with casual, heat-blasting efficiency. Des Gable's tow truck, a hulking, rust-colored beast of a machine, rumbled up the road. Des herself, a woman with steel-gray hair tied back in a bandana and grease stains on her arms that were likely older than Deputy Riley, climbed out of the cab. "Cole," she grunted by way of greeting, her eyes taking in the scene. "That the monster everyone's wetting their pants about." "This is one of them," Cole said. "We need to get it out of here before the whole town shows up. Your scrapyard, the big workshop, can you lock it down?" Des looked from the dead scourge to the sheriff's grim face. "Yeah, I can lock it down. Gonna cost you, though, a lot." They used the truck's winch to haul the heavy carcass onto the flatbed. The smell of scorched flesh was overpowering. As they secured it with heavy chains, Yena Orellana noticed something else. Embedded in the ground, a few feet from where the scourge had fallen, was a small, metallic object. It was a dart, about 6 inches long, made of a material that seemed to absorb the light. She carefully picked it up with a pair of forceps. It was cool to the touch. "It missed," she murmured. "This must have been its primary weapon." Later that night, in the cavernous, echoing space of Des Gable's main workshop, the scourge's body lay on a massive steel worktable under the glare of industrial lights. The doors were padlocked. Orellana, now in a full biohazard suit, began her examination. Bannerman stood by, a silent, grim observer. Her initial findings were astounding. The creature's biology was a nightmare amalgam. It had aspects of both reptile and insect, with a hyperoxygenated circulatory system that explained its speed and stamina. Its claws were retractable, made of a keratin compound laced with trace metals, harder than steel. The pump, she had theorized, was real. A complex muscular siphon hidden within its jaw, capable of creating a perfect vacuum. "It's engineered," she said, her voice tinny over the suit's intercom. "This isn't a product of natural evolution. Every part of it is designed for one purpose, to be the perfect terrestrial predator. Someone or something made this." The revelation added another layer of horror to the situation. Their monster wasn't a freak of nature. It was a weapon. And now something had come to decommission it. While Orellana worked, Bannerman got a call from Kobe Rivas. The boy's voice was stripped of its earlier bravado, replaced with pure, unadulterated terror. "Sheriff, I saw it. I saw the other one. I had my drone up again tonight near the stables." "What did you see, Kobe?" Bannerman asked, his grip tightening on the phone. "It wasn't there. And then it just appeared. It was tall, 7 feet maybe, but thin. It was wearing some kind of armor, and it was invisible. I could only see it when it moved like a ripple in the air. The scourge never stood a chance. The new thing, it just raised its arm and 3 beams of red light shot out. It was over in a second." There was a pause, a shaky breath. "Sheriff," it looked right at my drone. After it killed the other one, it looked right up at the drone. And then my screen went to static. Kobe's drone, his ticket to fame, had been found in a molten slag heap in a field half a mile from the stables. Bannerman hung up the phone. He looked at the dead scourge on the table, a pinnacle of biological slaughter. Then he looked at the clean, perfect holes punched through its body. One problem had been replaced by another, infinitely greater one. They were no longer just dealing with a monster. They were caught in the middle of a war, and they didn't even know the rules. Chapter 4: The Hunted Hunter. The revelation settled over Cinder Creek like a shroud. Kobe's second video, a corrupted file showing only a few seconds of a shimmering distortion and 3 searing beams of light, did more to terrify the populace than his first video had. The narrative had shifted. There wasn't one monster, there were 2. A beast of flesh and claw and a phantom with weapons of light. The town became a cage. People stayed indoors, hoarding food and ammunition. The roads leading out of Cinder Creek were empty. No one wanted to risk a breakdown in the vast, open desert that had become a battlefield for unknowable forces. This new entity, dubbed the Warden by Yaina Orellana for its apparent role in containing the scourge, was the true terror. The scourge was a monster, but it was a monster they were beginning to understand. It bled. It could be killed. The Warden was something else entirely. It was a ghost that commanded lightning. Its indifference was its most horrifying quality. It hadn't saved the horses at the stable out of any sense of altruism. They were simply not its target. The people of Cinder Creek were incidental, irrelevant. They were the grass, and 2 giants were wrestling over their heads. Sheriff Bannerman found his authority eroding. What good was a shotgun against a creature that could melt steel? He organized a rotating watch, stationing armed citizens at key points around the town's perimeter. It was a hollow gesture, more for morale than for any practical defense, and everyone involved comprehended it. Dr. Orellana worked relentlessly in Dessa's workshop, which had become her fortified laboratory. She dissected the scourge, mapping its alien anatomy. She analyzed the Warden's dart, discovering it was made of a complex carbon alloy that actively absorbed energy. She was a woman fighting an information war, trying to find a weakness, a pattern, any scrap of data that could be turned into a weapon or a shield. "The Warden is methodical," she explained to Bannerman one afternoon, pointing to a map of the county on the wall. Pins marked the locations of the scourge attacks and the Warden's appearances. "It's not random, it's closing a net. The scourge has been contained to this 50-square-mile area. The Warden is flushing it, driving it towards a specific point." She tapped a location on the map. "The old quarry. It's isolated, defensible. I think that's its kill box." For Mateo Cruz, the intellectual understanding of the conflict was meaningless. The new monster, the Warden, didn't matter to him. His grief had not been cauterized by a beam of light. It was a raw, open wound, and it demanded vengeance. He had seen the body of the dead scourge. It was one of them, but it wasn't the one that had destroyed his life. He remembered the sounds from that first night, the size of the thing he imagined in the darkness. He was certain there were more. A pack. And the one that had visited his ranch was still out there. While the town huddled in fear, Mateo prepared for a hunt. He packed a bag with water, dried meat, and ammunition. He studied topographical maps of the region, marking the locations of the attacks, looking for his own pattern. He saw what Orellana saw: the creatures were being pushed. But he also saw the ravines and canyons they would use for cover. He knew this land. It was in his blood. The scourge was a predator, but it was still an animal. It would have habits. It would have a lair. "You can't go out there, Mateo," Cole Bannerman said, standing in the doorway of Mateo's barn. He'd heard from Alma at the diner that Cruz was buying up .3006 rounds. "This isn't a cougar. You'll be walking into a war zone." "It's my war," Mateo said, not looking up from the action of his rifle, which he was cleaning with meticulous care. "That thing that killed my sheep is still out there. I can track it." "And what happens when you find it?" Cole pressed. "What happens when the other one shows up? You're a good man, Mateo. Don't throw your life away for this." Mateo finally stopped his work and looked up at the sheriff. His eyes were hollow, but his gaze was steady. "My life was in that field, Cole, with my animals. That thing took it. I'm just going to get a piece of it back." There was no arguing with him. Bannerman could see the resolve in his friend's face, a suicidal determination that logic could not penetrate. The lawman in him wanted to arrest Mateo, to lock him in a cell for his own protection. But the man in him understood. He just nodded grimly and left. The next morning, before the sun had risen, Mateo Cruz slipped out of his house, leaving a note for his wife on the kitchen table. He moved south, away from the town, melting into the pre-dawn shadows of the desert. He was a patient man and a superb tracker. He picked up the trail near the Henderson Ranch. The tracks of the scourge were distinctive once he knew what to look for: a long, loping stride, with deep, three-toed prints dug into the hard soil, the mark of a heavy creature moving fast. He tracked it for hours, the sun climbing high in the sky, beating down on him. He moved slowly, carefully, his senses on high alert. He was not just hunting, he was being hunted. He scanned the ridges not only for the scourge but for the shimmering distortion of the warden. Late in the afternoon, he found what he was looking for. The tracks led to a narrow, high-walled canyon. At the mouth of the canyon, he found another set of tracks, the strange, triangular prints of the warden. They were fresh. The warden was close. It had cornered its prey. Any sane man would have turned back, but Mateo was beyond sanity. He was a vessel of pure, cold rage. He checked his rifle, chambered a round, and slipped into the canyon, using the rocks and shadows for cover. The air inside the canyon was still and hot. The silence was absolute. He moved from boulder to boulder, his rifle held at the ready. 100 yards in, he saw it, the scourge. It was larger than the one they had found, its gray hide crisscrossed with old scars. This was the alpha. It was backed against a rock wall, its head low, its chest heaving. It was wounded, a deep gash weeping dark fluid from its shoulder. It was trapped. Mateo raised his rifle, centering the crosshairs on the creature's head. His finger tightened on the trigger. A flicker of movement to his right. He froze. Standing on a ledge of rock not 50 feet away was the warden. It was a tall, slender figure encased in smooth, matte black armor that seemed to drink the light. Its head was a featureless helmet, its face a blank, polished surface. It was not looking at the scourge. It was looking directly at Matteo. It raised one long, three-fingered hand, and the air around Matteo grew cold. It wasn't a threat. It was a dismissal. The warden turned its attention back to the cornered scourge. It raised its other arm, and a weapon materialized in its hand, a sleek rifle that hummed with contained energy. The scourge, seeing its end was near, let out a piercing shriek of defiance and charged, not at the warden, but at the only other living thing in the canyon. It charged directly at Matteo Cruz. Matteo had a split second. Fire at the scourge charging him or fire at the alien thing on the ledge. He roared, a sound of pure hate, and swung his rifle towards the scourge. He fired. The shot echoed through the canyon like a thunderclap. The bullet struck the creature in the chest, staggering it but not stopping its momentum. Before he could fire again, a beam of crimson light shot over his head, so close he felt the heat of it on his hair. It struck the scourge in the head. The creature's charge faltered, its head exploding in a shower of vaporized bone and tissue. Its massive body crashed to the ground, skidding to a halt just feet from where Matteo stood shaking. He stared at the dead monster, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had done it. He had gotten his revenge, however small. He slowly raised his head, looking towards the ledge. The warden was gone. The only sign it had ever been there was the faint smell of ozone and the dead scourge at his feet. And on the rock where it had stood, a small blinking light on a device it had left behind. A device that was now pointed directly at him. Matteo realized with a surge of cold dread that the warden had not missed. It had used him as bait. Chapter 5: The Warden's Bargain. The blinking light from the device on the ledge was a hypnotic emerald green. It pulsed in time with the frantic beat of Matteo's heart. He stared at it, the rifle feeling heavy and useless in his hands. He was out in the open. The warden, though unseen, was undoubtedly still here, watching him. The fight had been a test. The device was the result. He took a hesitant step towards it, his boots crunching on the gravel. The device was small, no larger than his fist, a smooth black pyramid with the single green light at its apex. It was not a weapon. He sensed that instinctively. It was something else, a communication device, a beacon, a trap. As he got closer, the light stopped blinking and shone with a steady, intense glow. A low hum emanated from it, a sound that vibrated not in his ears but deep inside his chest. Then a voice spoke. It was not a sound that traveled through the air, but a voice that bloomed directly inside his mind, stitched together from his own language, yet utterly devoid of emotion or inflection. Hunter, your target is sterilized. My target remains. Matteo froze, his blood turning to ice. The words were clear, precise, and terrifyingly intimate. The warden was talking to him. Your prowess is noted, primitive but effective. You possess a predator's instinct, an asset. He looked around wildly, scanning the canyon walls, the sky, the shadows. Nothing. He was alone with the dead scourge and the disembodied voice in his head. What do you want? he whispered, the words feeling clumsy and loud in the sudden silence of his own mind. The green light on the device pulsed once brightly. The alpha of the Scourge pack remains. It is the primary bioweapon. It is adaptive. It learns. It has assessed MYTACTICS, ITAVOIDS MY detection. The voice paused as if processing. It does not avoid yours. It perceives you as prey, a miscalculation we can exploit. A cold understanding washed over Matteo. The warden wasn't just a hunter, it was a strategist. It had watched him track this scourge, had seen his obsession. It hadn't saved him, it had evaluated him. It saw him as a tool, a bloodhound it could unleash. "You want me to hunt it for you," Matteo said, the realization settling in his gut like a stone. "To be your bait." Bait ATTRACTS. A hound FLUSHES. You will flush the prey, I will sterilize it. This is the proposal. And if I refuse? The voice was silent for a long moment. The hum from the device deepened. Matteo felt a pressure build behind his eyes, a glimpse of something vast and cold and utterly without mercy. He saw a brief, flashing image in his mind. His ranch, the fence, his wife's face through the kitchen window. The image was overlaid with a red, triangular targeting reticle. It was a threat of surgical precision. "Irrelevance is a mercy I can withdraw," the voice stated, a simple fact. "Your colony is DESIGNATED non-hostile, but is within the sterilization perimeter. Your cooperation ENSURES its continued designation." It was a bargain delivered at the end of a gun, a choice that was not a choice at all. Save his town, save his wife by walking into the jaws of the last, most dangerous monster, the Alpha. "What do I have to do?" Matteo asked, his voice rough with defeat. The device's light returned to its slow, steady pulse. The device is a biometric relay. It will monitor your position and vitals. It will provide a directional path to the target's last known location. Pursue. Engage. I will observe. The voice faded. The hum ceased. The pyramid on the rock fell silent, its green light the only sign of its power. Matteo walked over and picked it up. It was strangely light, the black material cool and smooth against his skin. As his fingers closed around it, a faint, glowing line like a vein of green light appeared on its surface, pointing deeper into the desert, away from the canyon. It was pointing him toward his prey, or his executioner. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and started walking. He was no longer just a man seeking revenge. He was now a pawn in an alien conflict, a hunter leashed by a phantom. Back in Cinder Creek, the tension had reached a breaking point. Sheriff Bannerman had expanded the town watch, but it felt like placing scarecrows in the path of a hurricane. The real work was being done in Des Gable's workshop. Yaina Orellana, fueled by coffee and a terrifying intellectual curiosity, had made a breakthrough. "It's the sound," she said, her voice electric with discovery. She pointed a finger at a complex waveform on her laptop screen. Cole and Des stood behind her, looking at the incomprehensible squiggles. "What sound?" Cole asked. "The Warden's energy weapons. They emit a specific, ultra-low frequency when they discharge. It's almost certainly outside the range of human hearing, but my equipment picked it up from Kobe's corrupted audio file. More importantly, I found the same frequency embedded in the damaged cells of the dead scourge. She typed furiously, bringing up another screen. The scourge's biology is incredible. It has specialized auditory organs, far more sensitive than ours. I believe the warden's frequency is not just a byproduct of its weapon, but a component of it. It's a targeting frequency. The warden paints its target with a sound we can't hear, and its weapon homes in on the signal. Des Gable, who had been listening with her arms crossed, grunted. So if we can make that sound, we can make it shoot at whatever we want. Yaina nodded, a thin, triumphant smile on her face. Theoretically, if we can replicate the frequency and project it with enough power, we could paint a target. We could turn the warden's own weapon system against the final scourge. We could make them kill each other. The idea was audacious. It was brilliant, and it was their only real shot. "Can you build something that can do that?" Cole asked, looking from Yaina to Des. Des ran a greasy hand through her hair. "Kid, I can build anything if I've got the parts and the power. The town's old emergency broadcast siren. The horn array is massive. If I can rewire the transducers and hook it up to the main power line from Gabe's substation, I might be able to generate enough juice to project a signal for miles." A plan began to form, a desperate three-pronged strategy. Des would build the sonic weapon. Yaina would pinpoint the exact frequency. And Cole would have to get the last scourge to the right place at the right time. The quarry. The warden's chosen kill box. His radio crackled to life. It was Deputy Finn Riley, his voice tight with panic. "Sheriff, you need to get over to the crew's place. It's Maria. She's frantic. Mateo's gone." Cole's blood ran cold. He had known Mateo was going to do something foolish, but he hadn't expected this. He looked at the map on the wall, at the pins marking the encroaching conflict. Mateo was out there, alone, walking right into the middle of it. He wasn't just a grieving rancher anymore. He was a liability, a wild card who could bring the whole war crashing down on them. "Yaina, get what you need," Cole said, grabbing his keys. "Des, get to work. I have to go get my friend." As Cole sped towards the crew's ranch, Mateo was miles deep into the Badlands. The glowing line on the device in his hand was his only compass. The sun beat down, and the silence of the desert was a heavy, suffocating weight. He moved with a renewed purpose. He was no longer just hunting the beast. He was drawing it toward a confrontation he knew he could not win alone. He was a chess piece, moved by an invisible hand, across a board of sand and rock. He crested a ridge and looked down into a wide, arid valley. In the center of the valley he saw movement. It was the Alpha, the last scourge. It was magnificent and terrible, its scarred, gray hide blending with the stone. It was digging, tearing at the ground with its formidable claws. It was unearthing something. Mateo raised his binoculars. The scourge was excavating a deep hole. From within the hole it pulled a metallic object, a pod, sleek, dark, and covered in the same alien markings as the warden's technology. The scourge nudged the pod with its snout, a strange, almost protective gesture. Mateo lowered the binoculars, his heart pounding. The scourge wasn't just a weapon, it was a guardian. It was protecting its young, or its replacements. The warden wasn't just here to kill a monster, it was here to stop it from reproducing. The alpha scourge suddenly lifted its head, its nostrils flaring. It tilted its head, its sensitive ears twitching. It had caught his scent. It turned its intelligent, malevolent eyes directly towards the ridge where Matteo hid. It let out a challenging roar, a sound of fury and territorial rage. Then it lowered its head and charged, not with mindless aggression, but with the focused intent of a creature defending its legacy. Chapter 6: The Sonic Gambit. The roar of the alpha scourge echoed across the valley, a raw, primal challenge. Matteo didn't run. He knew he couldn't outrun it. He dropped to one knee, snapping the rifle to his shoulder, the device from the warden clutched tightly in his other hand. The glowing line on its surface was now a brilliant, pulsing green. He was the beacon. The scourge closed the distance with terrifying speed, its powerful legs churning, kicking up clouds of dust. Matteo took a steadying breath, the crosshairs of his scope dancing over the creature's charging form. He aimed for the chest, a bigger target. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. The bullet hit the scourge high on the shoulder, tearing through flesh and bone. The creature stumbled, letting out a scream of pain and fury, but it didn't slow. It was a freight train of muscle and claw, fueled by adrenaline and rage. Matteo worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, chambering a new round. Too slow. The creature was almost on him, its massive head low, its jaws open to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. He saw its eyes, black and filled with a cold, hateful intelligence. Suddenly, a red beam of light, thin as a wire, sliced through the air above his head. It struck the ground just in front of the charging scourge, kicking up a shower of molten rock and superheated sand. The creature, blinded and stung by the spray, recoiled, skidding to a halt and shaking its massive head. Matteo scrambled back, his heart hammering. He looked up. On the ridge opposite him, the warden stood, its rifle raised. It had intervened. It had saved him, for now. The scourge, recovering its senses, let out a frustrated roar. It seemed to understand the dynamic. It couldn't get to Matteo without exposing itself to the warden, and the warden couldn't get a clear shot without risking its hound. A tense, three-way standoff settled over the valley. The warden's voice entered his mind again, cold and clipped. The subject has confirmed your position. It is stalled. Maintain visual contact. Lure IT north. TOWARDS, the excavation site, DESIGNATED quarry. It won't follow, Matteo projected back with his thoughts, the process feeling stranger each time. It's protecting that pod. The pod is a replication matrix, secondary objective. The alpha is the primary. It will not abandon its only offspring. If the hound moves, the prey will follow. Move. The warden lowered its rifle and simply vanished. The shimmer of distorted air was the only sign it had been there. Matteo was alone again with the wounded, enraged alpha. The creature watched him, its intelligent eyes calculating. It took a step back, positioning itself between Matteo and the hole where the pod lay hidden. It would not be drawn away easily. Miles away, The lights in Cinder Creek flickered and died. The entire town was plunged into darkness, save for the frantic beams of flashlights. "What was that?" Finn Riley yelled over the radio. "It's Des," Cole Bannerman's voice crackled back. "She's rerouting the main power grid. Everyone stay put. It'll be back in a minute." In the town square, Des Gable, wearing heavy-duty lineman's gloves, slammed a massive breaker switch into place. A thick, armored cable, as thick as a man's arm, snaked from the main power pole to the base of the old emergency siren tower. The tower itself was a relic, a 50-foot lattice of rusted steel topped with a circular array of horns. "Power is live," Des yelled to Yaina, who was perched precariously on the tower's platform, her laptop plugged into a complex new control panel Des had welded into place. "I'm reading it," Yaina called down, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. "The amplifiers are charged. It's working, Des. It's actually working." She began to type, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She was inputting the frequency, the precise sonic key that she hoped would turn the warden's weapon into their own. Cole's truck bounced over the rough terrain, following the signal from the tracker he'd placed on Mateo's own truck weeks ago. He found the vehicle abandoned at the mouth of the canyon. Mateo was on foot. Cole grabbed his shotgun and a medical kit and started tracking his friend, his heart heavy with dread. He wasn't just rescuing a man. He was trying to stop him from derailing the only chance they had. Back in the valley, Mateo knew he had to force the issue. The warden was right. He had to move. He had to draw the alpha away from its nest. He took a calculated risk. He fired his rifle, not at the scourge, but at the ground near the buried pod. The reaction was instantaneous. The scourge roared, a sound of pure protective fury, and charged again. This time, Mateo didn't wait. He turned and ran, scrambling back up the ridge he had descended. He was a fast runner, but the scourge was faster. He could hear its heavy footfalls closing behind him, the sound of its breathing, a harsh, ragged panting. He reached the top of the ridge, his lungs burning. He risked a glance behind him. The scourge was only 20 yards away, its claws tearing at the rock as it scrambled up the incline. He turned and sprinted, running north toward the quarry. He was the rabbit and the wolf was at his heels. He could feel the warden's presence, an unseen observer keeping pace. The bargain was being upheld. He was the bait and the trap was being set. "Yaina now," Cole's voice yelled over the radio he'd given to Des. He had found Mateo, or rather he had found the chase. From a high vantage point, he watched the terrifying drama unfold. His friend, a tiny, desperate figure being pursued by a monster of impossible size, heading directly for the quarry. "Broadcasting," Yaina yelled. She hit the enter key. A deep, subsonic hum emanated from the siren tower in the center of town. It was a sound that was felt more than heard, a vibration that rattled the windows in their frames and shook the dust from the rafters of the old buildings. The sound wave, focused and directional, shot out across the desert, a silent, invisible beam of energy aimed directly at the quarry. In the valley, the alpha scourge faltered. It shook its head, letting out a confused grunt. The sound was disorienting, a piercing note at the edge of its hearing. It was the sound it associated with the warden's attacks, the sound of danger. On a ridge overlooking the quarry, the warden materialized, its featureless helmet tilted, processing the new data. The targeting frequency was active, but it was not originating from its own systems. It was coming from the human colony, an anomaly, an interference. Its internal systems registered the signal's point of origin, the alpha scourge now entering the quarry, and a second, weaker signal, coming from a rusted metal structure inside the quarry itself, an old rock crusher. Mateo scrambled into the quarry, a vast, man-made bowl of rock and shadow. He dove behind the massive, dilapidated form of the rock crusher, his body screaming with exhaustion. He had made it. The scourge stood at the entrance to the quarry, confused by the competing sounds, its head darting back and forth between Mateo's position and the open desert. The warden raised its rifle, its targeting system locked onto the strongest source of the frequency, the alpha scourge. But as its weapon charged, its sensitive scanners picked up something else. A new energy signature, faint, biological, coming from inside the rock crusher, not from Mateo, from something else, something small and cold, another replication matrix, a second pod. The scourge hadn't just been guarding the one in the valley. It had been moving its young. It had planted another one here, in the heart of the warden's chosen kill box. It had laid a trap of its own. The warden's internal logic processed the new variables. Primary target, alpha. Secondary objective, replication matrix. The sonic weapon of the humans had inadvertently painted both targets. Its protocol was clear: neutralize all threats. It adjusted its aim slightly away from the scourge, toward the rock crusher, toward Mateo, and the pod hidden beside him. Chapter 7: Collateral Damage. The hum from the Siren Tower in Cinder Creek intensified. Yena Orellana bit her lip, her eyes glued to the power consumption readings on her laptop. "It's working," she whispered into her radio. "The frequency is stable. It's painting the entire quarry." Cole Bannerman, watching from his vantage point, felt a surge of hope. It was a crazy plan, cobbled together with scrapyard parts and theoretical physics, but it was working. He saw the warden raise its rifle. He saw the alpha scourge, confused and disoriented by the sonic pulse, standing exposed in the center of the quarry. The end was in sight. Then the warden shifted its aim. Cole's breath caught in his throat. The rifle was no longer pointed at the monster. It was pointed directly at the rock crusher, at Mateo. "Yena, shut it down," he screamed into the radio. "Shut it down now." But it was too late. 3 beams of incandescent red light erupted from the warden's rifle, converging on the rock crusher in a silent, devastating blast. The rusted steel of the machine vaporized on impact. The structure groaned, twisted, and collapsed in on itself in a deafening shriek of tortured metal, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and rock fragments. The alpha scourge roared, a sound that was less fury and more triumph. The sonic harassment ceased the instant the rock crusher was destroyed, the hidden pod within it obliterated. Its senses cleared. Its enemy had just eliminated the other hunter, the one it could not kill itself. The board was clear. Only prey remained. It turned its cold, intelligent eyes towards the ridge where Cole Bannerman lay hidden. Cole stared in horror at the wreckage, his mind refusing to process what he had just seen. Mateo was in there. His friend was gone, erased. Collateral damage in a war he never should have been a part of. A wave of hot, blind rage surged through him, eclipsing his fear. He grabbed his shotgun, his knuckles white. "Finn, Des, get everyone out of town," he yelled into the radio, his voice cracking. "Go north, now it's over, we lost." He broke from his cover and began scrambling down the treacherous slope towards the quarry, firing his shotgun wildly at the Alpha Scourge. The buckshot spattered uselessly against the creature's thick hide. He was a man possessed, running on grief and a suicidal need for retribution. The Scourge regarded him with something akin to contempt. It took a step towards him, ready to extinguish the insignificant gnat that was peppering it with pellets. Then something impossible happened. A figure rose from the smoking, twisted wreckage of the rock crusher. It was Mateo. He was battered, bleeding from a dozen cuts, his clothes torn, but he was alive. He had been on the far side of the massive machine, shielded from the direct blast by tons of solid steel. He held the warden's black pyramid device in his hand. Its green light was now a frantic, angry strobe. The warden's voice blasted through Mateo's skull, no longer cold and clinical but laced with something new. Urgency, critical mission failure, asset EXP and DED. Replication matrix DESTROYD, protocol shift, containment BY sterilization. The ground beneath the warden began to glow. The air around it shimmered violently. The triangular rifle in its hands dissolved, reforming into a small, spherical object that pulsed with an inner, white-hot light. "It's not trying to kill it anymore," Yena's panicked voice crackled over Cole's radio. "It's going to wipe the whole area off the map. The energy readings are off the charts. It's a bomb." The Alpha Scourge seemed to understand. It forgot Cole. It forgot Mateo. It turned and bolted, scrambling out of the quarry with incredible speed, trying to escape the imminent blast. It was no longer a predator. It was a fugitive. Mateo staggered forward, his gaze fixed on the warden. He saw the glowing sphere in its hands. He understood. This was the end game. The warden had failed its mission, and now it was going to burn the evidence. The town, the people, everything. He looked at the device in his own hand, the blinking pyramid, a relay, a biometric link. His life force, his position, was tied to this thing. An idea sparked in his mind, a desperate, final gambit. He started to run, not away from the quarry but towards the fleeing Scourge. He poured every last ounce of his strength into the chase, his legs screaming in protest, his lungs on fire. He was no longer the hound. He was the bomb. The warden, poised to trigger the detonation, paused. Its asset, the human hunter, was moving again, and he was closing on the primary target. Its cold, alien logic assessed the new development. The asset was still functional. The primary target was in range of the asset. A new possibility presented itself, a final, high-risk maneuver. "Asset, maintain pursuit. You are the vector," the voice commanded in Mateo's head. He didn't need the command. He was already committed. He chased the scourge out of the quarry and into the open desert, the monster's panicked flight giving him an edge. The gap between them closed. 50 yards, 30, 10. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, Matteo lunged. He didn't try to tackle the beast. He just reached out and slammed the pyramid device onto the creature's scarred, gray back. The smooth surface of the device seemed to adhere to the scourge's hide, the green light blinking furiously. He fell, tumbling in the dust as the scourge, panicked by the object now attached to it, ran on. On the ridge, the warden raised the glowing sphere. Matteo pushed himself up just in time to see it. He saw the scourge, now 20 yards away and still running, with the blinking green beacon on its back. He saw the warden, holding a miniature sun in its hands. He understood. There was a flash of light so brilliant it turned the world white. The sound did not follow. It was simply there, a physical concussion that slammed Matteo to the ground and ripped the air from his lungs. The heat was instantaneous, a wave of incandescent energy that seared the earth. When his vision returned, he was staring at a sky filled with smoke and falling ash. He pushed himself to his elbows, his ears ringing. He looked towards where the scourge had been. There was nothing, not a body, not a trace, just a wide, circular patch of ground that had been turned into black, glassy obsidian. He looked to the ridge where the warden had stood. It too was gone. The battle was over. He lay back, his body screaming in protest, and stared at the empty, smoke-filled sky. He was alive. He had won. The thought brought him no joy, only a profound, soul-crushing emptiness. Cole Bannerman found him an hour later. The sheriff was limping, his face smudged with soot, but he was alive. He helped Matteo to his feet, draping his friend's arm over his shoulder. "It's over," Cole said, his voice hoarse. "It's really over." They began the long, slow walk back towards the distant, flickering lights of Cinder Creek. They didn't speak. There were no words for what they had seen, for what they had done. They had survived a war between gods and monsters, and the scars would never fade. As they walked, neither of them noticed a new light in the night sky. High above, in the cold vacuum of space, a single, triangular ship hung in orbit. On its bridge, a new warden, identical to the first, observed the blackened crater on the planet's surface. It logged the mission report: primary target sterilized. Secondary replication matrices sterilized. Incidental native assistance, effective, expendable. Its mission was complete, but its scanners were already sweeping the planet, analyzing, cataloging, assessing the dominant species. A species that was primitive but aggressive. A species that had interfered. A species that, according to protocol, now required further observation. The warden turned its attention from the desert to the scattered lights of the planet's cities. The hunt was over. The surveillance had just begun. Chapter 8: The New Silence. The sun rose on a changed world. The smoke had cleared, leaving the air with a sharp, metallic tang. The patch of desert floor that had been turned to glass glittered darkly under the morning light, a permanent, unnatural scar on the landscape. The story of the final confrontation spread through Cinder Creek, pieced together from Cole's radio transmissions and Matteo's exhausted, fragmented account. The fear that had gripped the town did not vanish. It transmuted into something else, a hushed, weary awe. They had been perched on the brink of annihilation and had, by some miracle, survived. Mateo Cruz became a reluctant legend, the man who hunted the hunter, the man who faced down gods, but the accolades meant nothing to him. He retreated into himself, the silence he had once found peaceful now a suffocating reminder of all he had lost and all he had seen. The voice of the warden still echoed in the quiet moments, a phantom limb in his mind. He would wake in the night, his heart pounding, certain he could feel the cold, clinical pressure of its thoughts brushing against his own. He had been its hound, and the leash, though invisible, was still there. Dr. Yana Orellana was the only one who seemed to understand the true gravity of what had happened. She collected samples of the vitrified sand, her Geiger counter clicking softly. She analyzed the final, garbled data from her laptop, trying to comprehend the sheer scale of the energy the warden had unleashed. This wasn't an end, she told Cole one evening as they stood by the glassy crater. It was a field test. They were testing their weapon, they were testing its guardian, and they were testing us. She held up a small, sealed evidence bag. Inside was a single, scorched strand of gray, quill-like hair. It was all that remained of the alpha. This creature's DNA, it's a marvel of bioengineering, but there's something else woven into it. A marker, a genetic beacon. This thing was designed to be tracked across star systems. "What are you saying, Yana?" Cole asked, though he already knew. "I'm saying they knew exactly where it was. The warden. It could have sterilized this thing from orbit the moment it arrived. The whole chase, the hunt, putting Mateo in the middle of it. It was all a show, a performance to see how we would react, to see what we were capable of." Her words chilled him more than any monster had. The idea that their desperate struggle for survival had been nothing more than an experiment for a cold, unseen intelligence was a horror of a different kind. Cinder Creek tried to return to normal. The diner filled up again. The talk turned from monsters to crop prices and local gossip. But it was a fragile normality. Every time a strange light appeared in the sky, every time the coyotes fell silent for a night, a flicker of the old fear would return. They were a town with a secret so large it dwarfed their small lives. They had looked into the abyss, and they knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their bones, that the abyss was still looking back. One night, months later, Mateo was sitting on his porch, the same way he had on the morning it all began. He was watching the stars, not with wonder but with a wary vigilance. His wife, Maria, came out and sat beside him, taking his hand. They sat in a comfortable silence. Then he felt it. It was not a voice, it was not a thought. It was a faint, cold touch at the very edge of his consciousness. A query, a ping, a single, dispassionate pulse from the vast emptiness between the stars. The warden, or another one like it, was checking in on its asset. Mateo squeezed his wife's hand, a silent reassurance he did not feel himself. He did not look away from the sky. The hunt was over. The war was lost and won. But the silence that followed was not one of peace. It was the silence of a held breath, the silence of waiting for the other shoe to drop. He knew as he stared up at the indifferent stars that his leash was long, but it was still attached, and one day they would call for their hound again. Chapter 9: The Devil's Mirror. 2 years passed. Time, in its relentless, grinding way, smoothed the sharp edges of the terror. The story of the Cinder Creek siege, as the media had sensationalized it, became a footnote in the annals of bizarre rural events, a modern folktale. The town, by an unspoken, collective agreement, tried to forget. The crater, that perfect circle of black glass left by the warden's parting shot, was the one thing that wouldn't allow it. A local landowner, with a grim sense of capitalist irony, had fenced it off and started charging admission. Tourists came on weekends in air-conditioned cars, snapping photos and buying T-shirts that read, "I survived the Cinder Creek siege." They called the crater the Devil's Mirror. Sheriff Cole Bannerman watched them from his patrol truck, parked on a dusty overlook. The tourists, with their clean clothes and easy smiles, seemed like beings from another planet. They saw a roadside attraction. He saw a mass grave that held only one victim and the tombstone of his own peace of mind. The incident had aged him a decade. His shoulders stooped with a weight no one else could see. He ran on routine and black coffee, the motions of law enforcement, a comforting ritual in a world that no longer made sense. Dr. Yana Orellana had not left. She had secured a grant from a private research foundation, citing the need to study the unique geological and electromagnetic aftermath of a rare lightning strike phenomenon. It was a lie, but a plausible one. It gave her the funding to build a small, permanent observatory and monitoring station on a bluff overlooking the town. It was a blocky, windowless building filled with humming servers and custom-built sensor arrays. She spent her nights there, not looking at the stars but listening to the silence between them, searching for the whisper of a signal, the echo of a phantom. She, Cole, and Mateo were the sole members of a secret society of three, bound by a truth they could never share. Mateo Cruz had rebuilt. He had a new flock, a new fence. He worked his ranch with a quiet, relentless efficiency. But the man he was had died in that canyon. Mario would see him standing on the porch at night, his gaze fixed on the heavens, his face rigid. The life had gone out of his eyes, replaced by a permanent, weary vigilance. The pings from the warden had never stopped. They were faint, intermittent, like cosmic tinnitus at the edge of his perception. A psychic tick, a periodic check-in. At first, they had terrified him. Now they were just a part of his new silence, a constant, low-grade reminder that he was not his own. He kept a logbook, a simple spiral notebook where he recorded the date and time of each pulse. He didn't know why. It just felt like something he had to do. The fragile normality of Cinder Creek shattered on a Tuesday afternoon in October. It began without a sound. Across town, every device manufactured in the last 18 months simply died. New smartphones went black. The GPS in a delivery truck flashed and went blank. The digital cash register at the Dusty Spoon shut down, refusing to reboot. Older technology, Cole's aging patrol truck, Dess's welders, the landlines, remained untouched. It was a selective, technological plague. Panic was a slow-burning fuse. It started with frustration, then confusion, then a creeping dread. It was too specific, too strange. It felt like a deliberate, targeted act. In her lab, Yana Orellana stared at her screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her sensors, shielded and powered by an isolated system, had captured the event. It wasn't an EMP. It was a pulse, a single, complex data burst that had swept over the town. It was tight-beamed, originating from a fixed point in geosynchronous orbit directly above them. It was a signal designed to interface with and disable a specific subset of microprocessing chips. The warden's technology was not just observing, it was interacting. She picked up the hardline phone, her hand shaking slightly, and dialed the sheriff's office. "Cole," she said, her voice tight. "It started again." Cole was already in his truck, driving through the bewildered town. He saw people standing on the sidewalks, staring at their dead phones as if they were betrayed relics. The tourists at the Devil's Mirror were clustered around the gate, their late-model cars refusing to start. He knew, with a sinking feeling of inevitability, what it was. His radio crackled. It was Finn Riley, his voice tinny. "Sheriff, it's Mateo Cruz. He's on the line for you, says it's urgent." Cole pulled over. He didn't need to talk to Mateo. He knew what the rancher would say. He felt a phantom pulse in his own mind, a sympathetic echo of the dread Mateo must be experiencing. The ping had arrived, not as a whisper but as a shout. The wardens were no longer just watching. They were knocking on the door. Chapter 10: The Tuning Fork. The air in Yena's lab was cold and smelled of ozone. Cole stood with his arms crossed, staring at the complex graphs on her main monitor. The data was incomprehensible to him, but the sharp, vertical spike that represented the data burst was as clear as a knife's edge. "They didn't break anything," Yena explained, packing back and forth in front of the screen. "That's the terrifying part. They sent a targeted sleep command. It's reversible. They were testing their access, finding out what they could touch." "They shut down half the town, Yena. That's more than a test," Cole countered, his voice low and ragged. "That's a show of force." "No, it's more subtle than that," she insisted, her eyes alight with a terrifying intellectual fire. "It was a calibration. They sent the pulse and then they listened for the echo. I've detected a new signal since the event. A constant, low-wattage transmission from the same orbital position. It's a carrier wave. They've opened a channel. The question is, what are they using for a receiver?" The answer to that question was sitting in a worn armchair on a quiet ranch miles away. They drove to Mateo's place in Cole's old truck, the only vehicle they trusted. They found him on the porch, staring out at the setting sun, a spiral notebook resting on his lap. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "It was different this time," Mateo said, his voice a dry rasp. He didn't greet them, didn't acknowledge their arrival. He just started talking as if continuing a conversation that had been going on for 2 years. "It wasn't a poke. It was a flood. I felt it all. Every phone that went dark, every screen that died. It was like I was the wire that carried the shock." He opened the logbook. The last page was filled with a frantic, spidery script, a long string of numbers and symbols he couldn't have possibly known. Yena took the notebook, her breath catching in her throat. She compared the scrawled numbers to the data on her own tablet. "This is the pulse signature," she whispered, her face pale. "The raw code, Mateo. You didn't just feel it, you transcribed it. Your brain was the receiver." The three of them stood in the fading light, the horrific implications settling over them. Mateo wasn't just a leashed hound. He was an organic modem, a piece of human hardware the wardens were using to interface with their world. The pings he had been logging for 2 years weren't just check-ins. They were handshake signals, the system testing its connection to him. "Why?" Cole demanded, looking from Yena's horrified face to Mateo's empty eyes. "Why him? Why us?" "Because we're under the microscope," Yena said, her voice trembling slightly. "We engaged them. We interfered with their test. We proved ourselves an anomaly, so they put a tag on the most anomalous part of the equation." She looked at Mateo. He was the one who got closest, the one who demonstrated the most. Unpredictable aggression. He's their specimen. The word hung in the air, ugly and dehumanizing. Mateo flinched, a flicker of the old anger showing in his eyes. "I am not a specimen." "No," Cole said, putting a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You're our early warning system." They spent the next few hours in Mateo's kitchen. Maria moved around them, her silence a comforting presence, filling their coffee cups, her face etched with a deep, quiet worry. Yena set up a portable sensor array, linking it to Mateo with a series of small, adhesive electrodes on his temples. It was a crude setup, but it was the best she could do. They were trying to map the connection, to understand the language of the signal. "It's a two-way street," Yena murmured late into the night, staring at the readings. "The carrier wave from orbit is constant, but there are microbursts coming from him too. They're not just sending data to him, they're pulling it from him, his senses, his memories." Mateo went rigid. "They're seeing through my eyes." "I think so," Yena said softly. "They are using you as a biological sensor to get a ground-level perspective they can't get from orbit." The violation was absolute. It was a home invasion of the mind. Cole slammed his fist on the table, the coffee cups rattling. "So what do? We can't fight a satellite. We can't block a signal we can barely detect. We can't call for help because they'll lock us up in a padded room." He was right. They were completely, utterly alone. Trapped in a cage of secrecy, their only warden a man who was also their prisoner. The silence that followed was broken by Mateo. "There's more," he said, his voice low. He was looking at something far away. "Since the big pulse, I'm feeling something new. Not a signal from above, something from the ground, multiple points to the north." Yena's eyes widened. She cross-referenced the vague direction with her sensor logs. "There have been atmospheric disturbances, small ones, consistent with meteoroid entry. There's a minor meteor shower happening this week." Her voice trailed off as she connected the dots. "They're not meteors," Cole finished for her, a cold dread washing over him. "The wardens weren't just probing them. They were shipping them something." Chapter 11: The Falling Stars. The Perseid meteor shower was a welcome distraction for the rest of the world, a celestial light show that filled the news feeds. For the three people in Mateo Cruz's kitchen, it was a source of profound dread. Yena tracked the incoming objects, her software filtering out the natural debris, searching for the telltale trajectory of guided entry. "There," she said, her finger tapping on her tablet screen. 4 objects, small, decelerated far too rapidly for natural bodies. They didn't burn up. They landed, all within a 20-mile radius of the town." Mateo, with the electrodes still attached to his temples, shuddered. I feel them. They're cold, silent like seeds. A plan was made, born of grim necessity. They couldn't go to the authorities. They couldn't raise an alarm. They had to investigate themselves. Cole would go, armed. Yaina would accompany him with her sensor kit. Mateo would stay behind, acting as their psychic compass. If he could feel the objects, he could guide them and perhaps warn them of any change in their status. They chose the nearest impact site, a patch of arid scrubland 10 miles north of town. Cole drove his truck as far as the terrain would allow, the headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. They covered the final mile on foot, guided by Mateo's voice, a tense whisper over a short-wave radio. It's close, Mateo's voice crackled. To your left, near that cluster of rocks, it feels dormant, waiting. They found it in the center of a small, glassy crater no bigger than a dinner table. It was not a rock. It was a perfect sphere of the same matte black material as the warden's dart, about the size of a bowling ball. It was utterly featureless, absorbing the beams of their flashlights, creating a small, perfect void in the darkness. Incredible, Yaina breathed, pulling a spectrometer from her bag. The alloy is stable, no radiation, no thermal signature, it's completely inert. Cole prodded it with the barrel of his shotgun. It was heavy, solid. So it's just a rock they dropped. No, Yaina said, her own sensors now focused on the object. It's a delivery system. The outer shell is just a heat shield. The real technology is inside. As if summoned by her words, the sphere changed. A thin, hair-like seam of green light appeared, circling its equator. A low hum started, the same chest-vibrating frequency Mateo had felt in the canyon. Cole, back away, Yaina said, her voice sharp, grabbing his arm. The sphere split open with pneumatic precision, the two hemispheres separating silently. Nestled inside, cushioned in a strange, gel-like substance, was a crystalline lattice that pulsed with a soft, internal light. Before they could react, the lattice dissolved into a cloud of microscopic particles, a silver mist that hung in the air for a moment before settling onto the ground. The mist soaked into the parched earth, disappearing instantly. The empty black shell then fell silent. Its purpose was served. Suddenly, the radio clipped to Cole's belt shrieked with static. Mateo's voice screamed through, a sound of pure agony. It's awake. Oh God, it's in my head. I can feel the ground. He was cut off by another burst of static. Mateo, Cole yelled into the radio. Mateo, talk to me. There was no response. Yaina was staring at her tablet, her face ashen. My God, the seismic sensors. The ground here is vibrating. The water table. The mineral content. It's changing. Those particles, they're nanites, a terraforming agent. They're rewriting the local geology from the ground up. They had made a terrible miscalculation. The wardens hadn't sent monsters. They hadn't sent weapons. They had sent a plague of technology, a silent, insidious infection that was now spreading beneath their feet. And at that exact moment, as Yaina tried to process the geological data and Cole tried desperately to raise Mateo on the radio, the rancher himself was on the floor of his kitchen, his body convulsing. The world outside had vanished, replaced by a storm of data inside his own skull. He was no longer just a receiver. The warden had opened the channel completely. He could feel the nanites in the earth, feel them replicating, feel them working. He was their surveyor, his brain the processing unit for their planetary engineering project. Then through the storm the voice came, clearer and more powerful than ever before. It was not a bargain. It was not a command. It was a statement of purpose, delivered with the cold finality of a death sentence. Phase 2 initiated. The biosphere is unstable. The indigenous species hostile. Sterilization is inefficient. The new directive, replacement. Your neural network is the conduit. Your world will become ours. Observe. The psychic blast subsided, leaving Matteo gasping on the floor, the warden's final, horrifying word echoing in the ruins of his mind. He was no longer a hound or a camera. He was the first bridgehead in a silent invasion, a conscious witness to the slow, systematic replacement of his own world. Chapter 12: The Unraveling. The next few days were a quiet, surreal nightmare. The change was subtle at first. The water from the taps in Cinder Creek began to taste faintly of metal. The hardy desert plants, the creosote and sagebrush, started to wilt, their leaves curling and turning a sickly gray as if blighted from the roots up. Strange, crystalline veins like threads of spun glass appeared in the rocks of the quarry, glittering under the sun. The world was being unwritten. For Matteo, it was a waking torture. The connection was no longer passive. It was an active, agonizing symbiosis. He could feel the nanites spreading through the aquifer, a vast, intelligent network rewriting the very chemistry of the earth. He felt the life seeping out of the land, replaced by the cold, sterile logic of the alien technology. He would stand in his fields and feel the thirst of his dying crops as their root systems were choked by minerals they could not process. The wardens were not just replacing the world. They were making it uninhabitable for the life that was already there. He became a ghost in his own home. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. He would spend hours staring at nothing, his mind a torrent of geological data and alien schematics. Maria watched him waste away, her heart breaking, helpless to penetrate the psychic prison that held him captive. Yena Orellana worked with a frantic, desperate energy. Her lab became a fortress against the dying world. She sealed the ventilation, cycling the air, and relied on her own dwindling supply of bottled water. Her sensors confirmed her worst fears. The terraforming was accelerating. The nanites were self-replicating, spreading exponentially. At the current rate, the entire region's ecosystem would collapse within a month. "They're building something," she told Cole, her voice hollow from exhaustion. She pointed to a topographical map overlaid with a swirling energy grid projection. All 4 impact sites were nodes in a network, and the lines of energy were converging on a single point, the Devil's Mirror. The crater isn't a scar, it's the foundation. They used the first warden's weapon to carve out the bedrock to create the perfect stable base for whatever they're constructing. Cole looked at the map, then out the reinforced window of the lab at the dying landscape. He felt like a man trying to build a sandcastle against a rising tide. His authority, his shotgun, his very concept of law and order were meaningless against this silent, cellular invasion. He had evacuated the town once. How could he do it again? What would he even tell people? That the dirt under their feet was turning against them. His only weapon, his only asset was Matteo, and Matteo was dying. Cole found him in the barn, sitting on an overturned bucket, staring at the empty sheep pens. He looked like a man 100 years old. "Matteo," Cole said, his voice softer than he intended, "we need you one more time." Matteo didn't look at him. "Need me for what? To watch. I'm their eyes, Cole. I see what they're building. It's a gate, a receiver for them." "Can you fight it?" Cole asked, the question sounding feeble even to himself. "Can you push back?" A flicker of something that might have been bitter amusement crossed Matteo's face. "It's like a fly trying to push back against a river. It's in my blood, my bones. It's a part of me now." He finally turned to look at Cole, and the sheriff was startled by the clarity, the sudden, sharp focus in his friend's eyes. It was the look of a man who had made a final, terrible decision. "But a river can be dammed," Matteo said, "or poisoned at the source." He stood up, his movements stiff. "The connection flows both ways. They send me data. They receive data from me. What if I send them something they don't expect? Something they can't process?" Yaina understood immediately when Cole brought the idea to her. It was insane. It was a 1 in a billion shot, and it was all they had. "A feedback loop," she breathed, her mind racing. "A psychic Trojan horse. If we can overload the signal coming from him, we might be able to corrupt the network, or at least sever his connection to it. But the psychic energy required would be immense. It would. It would destroy him, Cole. It would burn out his mind like a light bulb." "He knows," Cole said grimly. The plan was simple and suicidal. They would use Des Gable's sonic tower, the one they had used to fight the Scourge. But instead of projecting the Warden's frequency, Yaina would modify it to amplify. She would turn it into a psychic tuning fork, aimed directly at Matteo. It would take the faint neural signals from his brain and amplify them 1,000-fold, firing them back along the Warden's own carrier wave. Matteo would be the bullet. His own consciousness, his memories, his pain, his rage, all of it would be the payload. They assembled at the Siren Tower in the center of the silent, wilting town. Des, her face a grim mask, powered up the system. The deep hum vibrated through the streets. Yaina sat at her laptop, her fingers poised over the keys. Cole stood beside Matteo, his hand on his friend's shoulder. "I remember the day my daughter was born," Matteo said suddenly, his voice surprisingly clear. He was looking at Cole but seeing something far away. "The way the sun came through the window at the hospital, I can still feel it, that warmth." He looked down at his hands. "They're trying to take that from me, to replace it with schematics, data, coldness." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "They want my world, they can't have it." He nodded to Yaina. "Do it." Yaina hit the key. The hum from the tower intensified, the frequency shifting, locking onto the pattern of Matteo's brainwaves. Matteo cried out, his body going rigid, his back arching. The electrodes on his temples glowed with a faint blue light. He was no longer just receiving. He was broadcasting. He focused his mind. He didn't push against the alien signal. He opened himself to it completely and then poured everything he was into the channel. The memory of his daughter's birth, the smell of the rain on the desert creosote, the grief for his lost flock, the terror in the canyon, the quiet love for his wife, the burning rage at the violation, decades of life of humanity, joy, sorrow, love, hate, a chaotic, emotional, illogical flood of pure, unfiltered human experience. He fired it up the beam, a defiant scream of existence aimed at the heart of the sterile, silent enemy in the stars. High above the earth, the warden's ship received the feedback. Its processors, designed for logic and data, were hit with a tidal wave of pure, chaotic emotion. Contradictory, irrational, painful. It was a virus for which there was no defense. Alarms blared on the silent bridge. Systems designed to observe and analyze were overwhelmed by the raw, untamed signal of a single, defiant human soul. The orbital carrier wave faltered, sputtered, and died. On the ground, the blue light from the electrodes on Mateo's head flared brilliantly and then went dark. He collapsed, his body limp. Cole caught him, lowering him gently to the ground. He was still breathing, but his eyes were open, vacant. He was gone. The man he had been was the price of victory. Chapter 13. A Different Silence. The silence that fell in the wake of Mateo's sacrifice was profound. The deep hum of the tower faded, leaving an ringing stillness. For a moment, nothing happened. The world was still gray, still dying. Then Yaina Orellana, her eyes wide, pointed at her screen. The nanite network, it's gone haywire. Without the guidance from the orbital channel, it's lost its cohesion. It's disintegrating. Cole looked at Mateo's still form, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He had won. He had poisoned the river. The aftermath was a slow, painful rebirth. The nanites, without a guiding intelligence, broke down, becoming inert, harmless minerals. The land, though deeply scarred, began the arduous process of healing. The first green shoots pushing through the gray earth were a miracle. The first taste of clean water was a sacrament. Cinder Creek had been to the edge of extinction and back. But the cost was immeasurable. Mateo Cruz never woke up. He lived, breathed, but the man within was gone, burned out to save them all. Maria cared for him, a quiet, heartbreaking vigil for a husband who was both there and not there. His vacant eyes were a constant, silent testament to the war no one else would ever know they had fought. Cole Bannerman retired. He could no longer uphold the simple laws of men in a world where he knew the true scale of lawlessness that existed in the cosmos. He spent his days sitting on Mateo's porch, watching over his friend, a silent guardian sharing a silence that was deeper than words. Yaina Orellana dismantled her lab. The grant money ran out, and her official reason for being there was gone. Before she left, she gave Cole a small, encrypted hard drive. "Everything I have is on there," she said. "The logs, the data, the recordings, Mateo's logbook, all of it. I don't know if the world will ever be ready for it, but it shouldn't be forgotten." She looked at the crater, the devil's mirror in the distance. History is full of stories about humanity fighting monsters. The terrifying thing is, we won this war by proving we were the more chaotic, the more illogical, the more unpredictable monster. She left Cinder Creek, carrying a truth that she knew would isolate her for the rest of her life. The town healed. People forgot. The story of the siege faded further, becoming just another strange chapter in the town's history. The Devil's Mirror remained, the black glass slowly being covered by dust and weeds, its sharp edges softened by time. Years later, Cole Bannerman sat on the porch, watching a now elderly Maria spoon-feed her silent husband. The world was peaceful. The sky was clear. But Cole knew it was a temporary peace. He knew that somewhere in the vast, cold darkness, an intelligence had encountered something it didn't understand. It had been beaten, not by superior firepower or technology, but by the chaotic, untamable force of a single human soul. They had not destroyed the enemy. They had only confused it. And he knew, with a certainty that was etched into his very being, that someday it would be back. Not with terraformers and silent invasions, but with new questions, new tests, and a new, more profound understanding of its strange, unpredictable foe. The war wasn't over. It had only entered a new and much more terrifying silence. Chapter 14. The Echo in the Glass. 8 years. 8 years the world spun, and the silence from the stars remained absolute. Cinder Creek healed, its psychic wound scarring over with new strip malls and housing developments that encroached on the desert's edges. The Devil's Mirror became a faded curiosity, the black glass slowly dulled by a permanent film of dust, its novelty worn thin. The town's population grew, drawing in families who wanted cheap land and quiet lives, people who knew nothing of the war fought in their backyards. Cole Bannerman had surrendered to the quiet. He lived in a small house on the edge of town, his days measured by the rising and falling of the sun. He read books, tended a small garden, and spoke to almost no one. The town had a new sheriff, a young, capable man who saw Cole as a local legend, a relic from a wilder time. The encrypted hard drive Yana had given him sat in a fireproof safe in his closet, a block of dormant poison. Mateo Cruz still sat on his porch. The years had turned his dark hair to gray. Maria, her own face a beautiful, tragic map of loyalty and loss, still cared for him. The vacant light in his eyes had never changed. He was a statue carved from grief. The psychic pings from the void had stopped the day he'd collapsed. The channel, it seemed, was permanently closed. The new silence was broken by a missing persons report. A pair of teenage tourists, drawn by the lingering myth of the crater, had hopped the fence at dusk to get a photo. Their car was still in the dusty parking lot the next morning. Their phones, a new generation of devices untouched by the old pulse, were inside it. They had simply vanished. Sheriff Finn Riley, no longer a green deputy but a man seasoned by the mundane troubles of a growing town, handled the case by the book. He organized search parties. He interviewed the parents. He walked the perimeter of the Devil's Mirror himself, the dusty glass reflecting the empty blue sky. He found nothing. No tracks leading away. No signs of a struggle. It was as if the two teenagers had been erased. A week later, a truck driver on an overnight haul pulled off the highway, claiming his rig's guidance system had gone haywire near Cinder Creek. He said the screen had filled with a strange, branching pattern like frost on a window, and a woman's voice had whispered his daughter's name through the speakers. He was dismissed as a crank, overtired and spooked by local legends. But Finn Riley remembered the old stories. He remembered the look in Cole Bannerman's eyes after the siege. He knew, with a policeman's intuition, that these new, strange events were threads from the same dark tapestry. After exhausting all official avenues, he drove his patrol car to the small house on the edge of town. Cole answered the door, looking older and more tired than his years. He listened to Finn's report, his face an unreadable mask. He showed no surprise, only a deep, profound weariness, as if he'd been waiting for this knock for 8 years. "The glass," Cole said, his voice rusty from disuse. "Did anyone touch the glass?" Finn shook his head. "Not according to the report. The fence is still intact." He paused. "The truck driver. He said he saw something out there. He said it looked like the glass was growing." That evening, Cole Bannerman opened his safe for the first time in years. He plugged the hard drive into an old, offline laptop, the screen illuminating his weathered face. He found Yaina Orellana's contact information. She was a senior researcher at a university in another state, a respected name in astrophysics. He typed out a short, cryptic email. "The mirror is showing new reflections." 200 miles away, Maria Cruz was helping Mateo with his dinner. He ate mechanically, his gaze fixed on the wall. For 8 years there had been nothing. No twitches, no sounds, utter vacancy. But as she raised a spoon to his lips, his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. The strength was shocking. His head turned, his empty eyes locking onto hers. A single word escaped his lips, the first sound he had made in nearly a decade. It was a dry, cracking whisper, a voice dredged up from a deep, forgotten well. "Thirsty," he said. Maria dropped the spoon, her heart seizing in a mixture of terror and impossible hope. The word was not a request. It was a statement. He wasn't thirsty. Something else was. Chapter 15. The Geometry of Grief. Yaina Orellana arrived in Cinder Creek 2 days later, not in a dusty Subaru, but in a discreet rental sedan. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, her clothes more professional. But the sharp, analytical fire in her eyes was the same, now banked with the caution of someone who knew the true cost of curiosity. They met at the crater at dusk. The air was still and cool. The site was cordoned off with police tape, a fresh addition by Finn Riley's department. "The energy signature is wrong," Yaina said, her voice low as she scanned the area with a handheld device far more advanced than her old equipment. "There's no M field, no radiation. It's biological, faint, but it's there. It's like the geological equivalent of a brainwave." Cole shone a heavy flashlight onto the surface of the black glass. It was no longer smooth. Thin, crystalline filaments, like the ones they had seen in the rocks years ago, were now spreading across the crater's surface in complex, geometric patterns. They branched and intersected, forming intricate webs that looked disturbingly like diagrams of neural networks from a biology textbook. "It's not growing," Cole said, tracing a pattern with his beam. "It's thinking." "The nanites were never truly inert," Yaina murmured, her mind racing. "The feedback loop from Mateo didn't just sever the connection, it corrupted their programming. It shattered the alien logic and replaced it with a new template, the raw, chaotic data of a human mind. His mind." The horror of it settled over them. This place wasn't a tombstone. It was a monument to a psychic explosion, and now it was waking up, rebuilding itself in the image of the very consciousness that had destroyed its original purpose. The missing teenagers, Cole said, the pieces clicking into place. The trucker, it's reaching out, it's trying to connect. It's pulling data, Yana corrected. Just like the wardens did with Mateo, but it's not using a carrier wave. It's using proximity, it's learning, evolving, and it's using Mateo's fragmented psyche as its operating system. They drove to the Cruz ranch under a starless, overcast sky. The silence in the truck was heavy with unspoken dread. They found Maria in the living room, sitting in the dark. "He's been talking," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. "In his sleep. He says things he couldn't know, the names of the missing kids, the name of the truck driver's daughter." They went to Mateo's room. He was lying in bed, his breathing shallow, but his eyes were no longer vacant. They were moving, tracking something unseen on the ceiling. As Yana began setting up a portable EEG monitor, Mateo spoke, his voice clear, conversational, and utterly chilling. "The lattice requires more inputs," he said, staring at the ceiling. "The grief matrix is incomplete. The patterns of loss are beautiful." Yana froze, her hands hovering over her equipment. The words were a sterile, analytical description of human sorrow. It was the detached logic of the warden, but it was describing the emotional trauma that Mateo had weaponized. The two forces had merged. The entity they were facing was a hybrid, a technological god with a broken human heart. "Mateo," Cole said, stepping closer to the bed. "Mateo, can you hear me? It's Cole." The eyes on the ceiling shifted, focusing on Cole with an unnerving intensity. A flicker of recognition crossed Mateo's face, followed by a wave of immense sadness. "So thirsty, Cole," he whispered, and this time Cole understood. It wasn't the land, it was the machine. It needs memories, it needs pain to grow, it's hungry. The EEG monitor beside the bed suddenly spiked, the calm brainwave patterns exploding into a chaotic scribble. Yana looked at the screen, her blood running cold. "It's not just him anymore," she said. "The signal, it's synchronized. The energy reading from the crater just changed. It's matching his brain activity perfectly." She looked from the screen to Cole, her face pale with terror. "He's not just the ghost in the machine. He's becoming its god." The machine was learning to feel, using Mateo's grief as its primer. And it was beginning to hunger for more. It had tasted the memories of the passing tourists, and now it was looking toward the town, a buffet of love, loss, and pain, ready to be harvested. Chapter 16: The Harvest. The new horror was quieter, more insidious than the first. There were no monsters tearing through fences, no phantoms with rifles of light. There was only a creeping, psychological dread that settled over Cinder Creek like a low-lying fog. People began to change. It started with dreams. All over town, residents reported having the same vivid nightmares. They dreamt of a vast, dark mirror under a starless sky, and they felt an overwhelming sense of loss, a grief that wasn't their own but was as real and painful as any they had ever known. They woke up weeping for children they'd never had, for parents they'd never lost. Then came the waking moments. A mother at the grocery store would suddenly be crippled by a memory of a tragic accident that had never happened to her. A man working on his car would be paralyzed by a vivid recollection of a battlefield death from a war he'd never fought. The entity at the crater, the thing Yaina had begun to call the glass locust, was reaching out. It was harvesting. It was clumsily plucking memories and emotions from the minds of the townsfolk, feeding its own growth. The town began to fray at the seams. It was a plague of stolen grief, a virus of second-hand trauma. Fights broke out over imagined slights. People became paranoid, withdrawn, their own personalities diluted by the flood of alien emotions. They were losing themselves. Yaina, Cole, and Finn Riley became a desperate, isolated command center. They had to operate in secret. How could they explain that a patch of glass in the desert was feeding on the town's collective soul? "It's not random," Yaina explained, pointing to a map of the town in their makeshift headquarters in the back room of the sheriff's office. Pins marked the reported incidents. The effect is strongest on people with recent trauma, a death in the family, a lost job, a broken heart. It's drawn to emotional vulnerability. It's using their pain as an open doorway into their minds. Cole looked at the map, at the growing clusters of pins. It's refining its technique. It's learning how to target people. Worse, Yaina said, her face grim. It's learning how to create the trauma it needs. That afternoon, a gas line under the main street ruptured without warning. The explosion was contained, but the shock and fear it sent through the town was a palpable wave. Yaina's sensors spiked. The locust had feasted on the panic. The accident had been no accident. The nanite network, though fragmented, was still buried in the earth. The locust was learning to manipulate its environment. It was no longer just a passive receiver. It was an active predator, engineering fear to create the emotional sustenance it craved. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Finn got a call from the hospital. Mateo Cruz was awake, not just talking but sitting up, asking for food, lucid. Maria was beside herself with joy, calling it a miracle. Cole and Yaina knew better. They rushed to the hospital. They found Mateo sitting in his bed, looking out the window. He was thin, but the vacancy in his eyes was gone. He looked like the man he had been, a decade younger, the grief and weariness erased. "It let me go," Mateo said, turning to face them. His voice was calm, steady. "It doesn't need me anymore. It has better connections now." He was no longer the conduit. He was the blueprint. The locust had finished copying the template of his mind and was now a self-sustaining consciousness. It had drained him of his trauma, leaving him an empty, peaceful vessel, and had cast him aside. "Why are you telling us this?" Cole asked, his hand resting on the holstered pistol he now wore again. A flicker of the old Mateo, the man who had charged a monster in a canyon, surfaced in his eyes. "Because I remember what it took from me, and I can feel what it's becoming. It's not just feeding, it's building. It's using the emotional energy, the memories. It's trying to create a body for itself, a physical form." He looked out the window toward the crater. "It took my grief. Now it wants to take yours, all of yours. It wants to feel everything all at once. It's going to harvest the whole town." The final act was coming. The locust was preparing for a mass feed, an event that would drain every mind in Cinder Creek, leaving behind a population of empty shells like Mateo. And with that final surge of power, it would have enough energy to build itself a physical vessel. They stood in the hospital room, the three of them, facing an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere, a psychic god born of their own pain. "How do we fight a ghost made of our own feelings?" Finn asked, his voice cracking. Yaina looked at the hard drive she'd brought with her, the one containing all the data from the First War. "The first time we fought a logical machine with chaotic emotion. This time, we're fighting an emotional machine." Her eyes narrowed. "So we have to fight it with logic, with nothing." She looked at Cole, then at the man who was once Mateo. "The feedback loop worked once. It can work again. But this time we can't feed it a soul, we have to feed it an absence. We have to show it the one thing it can't understand." "And what's that?" Cole asked. "The void," Yaina replied. "We have to broadcast pure, absolute silence. Not just the absence of sound, but the absence of thought, of emotion. The psychic equivalent of absolute zero. We have to unplug it from its power source, us." And the only person who knew what that void felt like, who had lived in it for 8 years, was sitting on the bed right in front of them. Mateo Cruz, the man who had been emptied, was now their only weapon. Chapter 17. The Silence and the Fury. The plan was a whisper against a hurricane. The locust was growing exponentially, its psychic tendrils reaching deeper into the town. People were walking through the streets in a daze, their faces etched with second-hand sorrows. The harvest had begun. Their only hope was to sever the connection at its source. They needed to get Mateo to the Siren Tower and use him as the focal point for a broadcast of pure, psychic silence. But the locust, a being born of Mateo's own mind, seemed to anticipate their every move. As they tried to escort Mateo from the hospital, the town turned against them. The locust asserted its influence. The quiet citizens of Cinder Creek, their minds puppets of the glass god, stood in their way. Their eyes were distant, their movements jerky. They didn't attack. They simply formed a wall of flesh, their faces blank, silently barring the path. The entity was using the townspeople as a physical immune system to protect itself. "It knows," Yaina said, as they found their path from the hospital blocked. "It's using them to keep him away from the tower." It was Des Gable who provided the way. The grizzled mechanic, older but no less tough, rumbled up in her massive tow truck, its engine one of the few old-tech machines still reliable. "Roads blocked, you say?" she grunted, a grim smile on her face. "Haven't heard that one before." She didn't plow through the people, but her truck, a roaring, smoke-belching monster, was an intimidating enough presence to make the passive crowd part before it. They made it to the town square. The air was thick, heavy with a psychic pressure that made their teeth ache. At the center of the square, the Siren Tower stood like a gallows. The locusts knew they were coming for it. The ground around the tower began to tremble. The crystalline veins they had seen at the crater were now erupting from the earth here, growing at a visible rate, climbing the legs of the tower, trying to cripple the weapon that could destroy it. "It's fighting back," Finn yelled, firing his service pistol at the growing crystal formations. The bullets ricocheted harmlessly. "Forget that, get him to the platform," Cole commanded. Des powered up the tower, the hum a familiar, deep thrum of defiance. Yaina, her laptop wired into the new controls, began the frantic process of calibrating the amplifiers, not for a specific frequency, but for a terrifyingly complex pattern of cancellation. She was trying to create a cone of absolute neural silence. Cole and Finn half-carried, half-dragged Matteo up the rickety ladder of the tower. Below them, the crowd of townspeople began to converge, moving with a slow, relentless purpose. "Yaina now!" Cole screamed as they reached the platform. He strapped Matteo into a chair they had bolted to the platform, placing the modified electrodes on his temples. Matteo looked at him, his face calm, serene. The peace of a man with nothing left to lose and nothing left to give. "Tell Maria I saw the sun," he said, his voice quiet amidst the growing chaos. Yaina initiated the broadcast. A wave of pure, unadulterated nothingness erupted from the tower. It wasn't a sound or an absence of sound. It was an anti-presence, a psychic void. As the wave washed over the town, the people in the square below faltered, their eyes blinking as if waking from a long dream. The psychic puppet strings had been cut. But the locust at the crater roared. The feedback loop was not just starving it, it was erasing it. It fought back with the only weapon it had left. The ground at the center of the devil's mirror bulged upwards. The black glass shattered, and a figure began to pull itself from the earth. It was a nightmare of crystal and light, a vaguely humanoid shape 10 feet tall. It was not a solid body, but a shimmering, semi-translucent being of woven crystal, its form constantly shifting. At its core burned a furious emotional light, the harvested pain of Cinder Creek. It was the god in the machine, and it had just been born. It took a thunderous step, and the ground shook. It was heading for the tower to destroy the source of the silence that was unmaking it. On the platform, the strain was too much. The amplifiers sparked and the system overloaded. The cone of silence collapsed. The psychic pressure returned, 10 times stronger than before. The people below screamed as the locust reasserted its control, their minds battered. The crystalline giant strode through the town, buildings cracking under its tread. It was a being of pure, raw emotion, and its rage was absolute. Cole stood on the platform, his shotgun useless. It was over. They had failed. Then Matteo spoke. "It's still me," he said, his voice strained. "Deep inside, it's built from my pain. I'm the foundation." He looked at Cole, and for the first time in a decade, Cole saw his friend again. The rancher, the hunter, the man filled with a cold, hard rage. "It feels grief. It feels fear. Let's show it fury." He ripped the electrodes from his own head. He stood up, steady on his feet, and faced the approaching crystalline god. He opened his mouth, and he did not scream. He broadcast. He focused the last embers of his own stolen fury, the pure, undiluted rage of a man whose life and world had been taken from him, and he fired it like a bullet into the mind of the god he had created. The giant faltered. Its crystalline form flickered. It was a creature of harvested emotion, but it had never experienced a single, pure, weaponized emotion aimed directly at its core. Matteo's focused rage was a poisoned dagger in its heart. It clutched its head, a strangely human gesture, and roared in confusion and pain. The harvested emotions within it warred with the pure fury of its creator. The locust began to destabilize. Its crystalline form cracked, light bleeding from the fissures. It began to crumble, not from a physical attack, but from an internal psychic contradiction it could not resolve. With a final, silent scream that echoed in every mind in town, the glass god shattered, dissolving into a billion points of fading light that rained down and vanished before they touched the ground. On the tower, Mateo Cruz collapsed, his body finally giving out. Cole caught him. This time, when he looked into his friend's eyes, there was nothing. Not the serene emptiness, not the vacant stare. Just the final, absolute silence of a life truly spent. Mateo was gone. The sun rose on a town that would never comprehend the battle fought for its soul. The people remembered only a night of shared nightmares and a sudden, inexplicable peace. The Devil's Mirror was once again a crater of inert, dusty glass. Cole Bannerman stood at his friend's grave a week later. The world was quiet. The silence from the stars had returned. But he knew now that the silence was not absence. It was a space waiting to be filled. They had fought the warden's logic with emotion. They had fought their own corrupted emotion with logic, and finally, with a singular, purified emotion, they had survived. He looked up at the sky, no longer with fear, but with a weary, grim understanding. Humanity's greatest strength, its chaotic and unpredictable heart, was also the ultimate cosmic liability. It was a beacon, and sooner or later something new, something different, would come to investigate the strange, beautiful, and terrible light. The silence was not an end. It was just a pause between storms. The end.